Okay. Plaintiff ready to make the closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed, please. You may be seated, folks.
Before I proceed, can I just retrieve Plaintiff's Exhibit 3 from the members of the jury?
Yeah, they're all yours.
Photograph. Sure. Perhaps back there.
I've got an extra one.
Ah, I can grab one from the
Photograph?
bench. The photograph. Thank you. May I proceed, Your Honor? Of course. May it please the court, counsel, co-counsel, ladies and gentlemen, follow the lies. When we first heard the story of today's case, when we first saw the facts, we heard a story about strange phone calls, late-night meetings, and misinformed voters. It was difficult to imagine that a public servant could have been behind all of this. But members of the jury, though the evidence doesn't lie, today it is shown that this defendant did. And eventually, the facts of this case make it clear that what happened in the weeks leading up to when voters crowded into polling places to choose their leader was something different. That this isn't the misunderstanding that we all want to believe it was. Because if we work backward, if we start with the election fraud on election day, and we consider that misinformation, the cover-up, and trace it all back to the beginning, the evidence of this defendant's wrongdoing is clear. Because all we have to do is follow the lies. See, today you heard about a man who was passing out things about voting requirements that just weren't true, intimidating the people of District 12. But members of the jury, the election fraud in Truman, it didn't begin with this man on Election Day last month. No, this is a story that began long before. You see, our story began 4 months ago, behind the walls of a campaign office meeting, with the inception of a strategy to suppress votes and a decision to intimidate the people of District 12. When that defendant looked at a mayoral race that was getting close and decided that she didn't need to follow the rules. And it's because Ms. Ziegler chose to come forward that we know the truth of where this story began. It's a late night in February. She told you that the man, the same one who gave those voters those flyers, who made those phone calls, he opens the back door, looks around to see if anyone's watching, and walks into the Heisman campaign headquarters. There he meets with the mayor, gives the mayor the number to a burner phone he had bought just that afternoon, collects his pay, tucks it into his jacket pocket, and sets out on the work that the mayor didn't want to do herself. You see, members of the jury, all of that misinformation, the reason all of those folks in District 12 aren't able to vote on Election Day, it all comes back to this moment, to this meeting, to that man sitting across the table from that defendant. March 20th, the mayor showed a photo of that man, told what he did, and asked if she knew him. The man in that photo? I have no idea who he is. Never seen him before in my entire life. The words of this defendant. You see, today it was our burden to prove to you that what happened in District 12 wasn't a fair election. The law in Midlands is very clear, and it tells us that if someone conspires to misinform or intimidate voters with the intent to suppress legal votes, then they must be held responsible. What this means, members of the jury, is that if you believe, by the preponderance of the evidence, remember, that's just a tip of the scales, a hair over 50%, that when this mayor met with that man, when she stored the number to the burner phone he used to misinform voters in her cell, when she denied knowing him at a press conference, that she meant to prevent people from voting, then you must find the defendant lying. And members of the jury, you heard evidence of intentional election fraud from not one, not two, but 3 witnesses during the plaintiff's case in chief. When first Mr. White, and then Ms. Ziegler, and finally Mr. Garcia walked through those doors, made their way in front of this jury box, sat in that chair, and helped to connect the defendant to this wrongdoing by helping you to follow the lies. Mr. White told you that he was given information about voting that was false. Told that he couldn't go to the polls on Election Day if he hadn't graduated from college, if he didn't own a home, if he'd ever been arrested. He was told that if he tried to vote and broke these rules anyway, he'd be fined $5,000. He could be thrown in jail. He told you that the man who was spreading all that misinformation was the man in this photo, a man that we know by the name of Casey French. And just moments after Mr. White stepped down from the stand, Ms. Ziegler sat up there and she told you that this strategy was the mayor's from the very beginning. that she was the architect for months. She sat there, members of the jury, and told you that she saw the mayor meeting with that man just weeks before the election took place. That she saw the mayor who authored this election fraud strategy meeting with the man who spread it to voters. But you didn't just have to take her word for it. That's because Gregory Garcia, an expert in the field of cell phone forensic analysis, took that stand and told you the very same day that Ms. Ziegler said she saw that man in the campaign headquarters, the very hour she said she watched him walk in the back door to meet with the mayor, that man's burner phone number was stored into the mayor's cell. But this isn't just a story that you heard from the plaintiff's witnesses on direct. No, it's something that you heard from the defense's own witnesses on cross. You see, Mayor Heisman, she took the stand first today, and of course she's going to tell you, members of the jury, that she had nothing to do with this. Of course she's going to deny knowing how that phone number got into her cell, but I wrote down her words, because the defense's only excuse for how the one number that was used to misinform all of those voters got in their client's cell phone came from the words of this defendant. I don't really know. Members of the jury, she told you that she let Ms. Ziegler go, and that Ms. Ziegler couldn't be right. But members of the jury, they offered no evidence to contradict what Gregory Garcia told you on the stand. Members of the jury, that phone number, it wasn't just used to contact a few voters. It was used to communicate with nearly 2,000 people, like Mr. White, in an election that the defendant won by 200 votes. You heard from Miss Sandberg, a reporter right next door in Truman, who told you that she herself saw a campaign strategy memorandum that suggested that the mayor wanted to suppress the vote. She told you she knew that the defendant lied in that press conference when she said she'd never met that man before, and that man, he had been convicted of fraud and impersonating police officers in the past. That the mayor knew that if she needed to go to somebody to make sure that she could suppress votes, well, he was the right man for the job. And finally, you heard from Professor Chase Mike, who tried to tell you that all this fraud, it didn't change the outcome, but the only thing you need to remember when you think about Professor Michael is the number $500,000. It's what was paid to him by this defendant, giving him every reason to sit on the witness stand today and sell you his version of statistics that just don't agree with the facts. See, members of the jury, that man and this man, they targeted people. They looked at everyday people and decided that they could convince them that they weren't good enough to vote, that they were second-class citizens. These are people who couldn't afford to go to college. People like Mr. White who deserve our protection more than any others. People who work day in and day out to make the lives of their kids just a little bit better than the ones that they've had themselves. Our voice is the most important thing that we have. And if the people that we put in power try to take our voice, if they lie and they deceive to prevent people from voting, we have to hold them responsible. I realize that what I'm asking you to do today isn't easy. It might be easy to say that because the mayor's a public servant, she never would have wanted this to happen. Easy to say that because the mayor wasn't the person handing out those flyers or making those phone calls, that she wasn't behind it from the very beginning. But we don't come into a courtroom to do what is easy. No, we come into these rooms to do what is right. Follow the lies. You'll find this defendant, and I'm confident you'll find her lying. Thank you.
Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed?
Yeah, of course.
May it please the court, counselors, members of the jury, Mr. Fields asks you to follow the lies because his case depends on two lies. From his second witness, Samantha Ziegler, and we'll get there, but first I'll ask you not to follow the lies, but to follow the facts. Let's talk about some facts. What we've heard here today. I remember in his opening statement, Mr. Lustbader came before you, said it'd be a complicated trial. Said he wanted you to look at it through a narrow lens. Let's try to see simplicity through all that complexity. Of the 6 witnesses that we heard from today, how many of them told you that they didn't vote in this election as a result of any sort of misinformation fraud. Of the 6 witnesses that we heard from today, how many of them told you that they knew anyone who didn't vote in this election as a result of misinformation fraud? Of the 6 witnesses that we heard from today, how many of them told you they saw the mayor distributing misinformation fraud? Of the 6 witnesses that we heard from today, how many of them told you that they heard the mayor distributing misinformation fraud? Of the 150,000 people, council wants to talk about voices being heard. Of the 150,000 people who made their voices heard by voting in the 2015 mayoral election, how many did they call to the stand who didn't vote as a result of misinformation fraud? How many did you hear about of that entire population of Truman Midlands who didn't vote in this election as a result of misinformation fraud? The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, the mayor is not responsible for any sort of misinformation, and whatever misinformation there was, they couldn't find a single voter who was persuaded by it. Folks, we're in court despite the fact that the people of Truman have already spoken. We're in court because despite that fact, Elizabeth Ginger's not listening. She lost touch. And so she lost. And it's that simple. Council's right that they needed to prove it was more likely than not true that Ms. Ginger, rather Mayor Heisman, was responsible for misinformation fraud. But what that means is that they needed to prove not just that misinformation fraud was being distributed in Bellevue, but that that mayor was behind it. And when exactly, ladies and gentlemen, did they do that? First, they called Amari White to the stand, and Mr. White said that the man handing him the flyers wasn't the mayor, that the man making the calls wasn't the mayor, that he never associated those flyers or those calls with anybody on the mayor's team. Then they called Ms. Ziegler to the stand, and they presented evidence of that memo. First of all, if you believe that that memo is actually real, read the memo. It says that nothing the campaign wants to do is illegal. But why should we believe what Ms. Ziegler says? As the mayor said when she came to testify, Ms. Ziegler was a junior staffer. She just joined the campaign. She was an intern, folks. Do you really believe that the mayor would let into a nefarious meeting, give a nefarious piece of documentation to somebody who just joined the team and who she wouldn't end up hiring? The truth about Samantha Ziegler is that that story she told you, she told for the first time to anyone when the Midlands Election Commission tried to get her to say something a month after she claimed she saw the meeting with that man. That was the first time she mentioned it. She hadn't mentioned it to anybody else before that, and we know why she did it. It's because she believed that the mayor cost her her job, and she wanted to cost the mayor hers. And their third witness, Greg Garcia, he came to the stand, and you heard him say he examined every single computer in the mayor's office, every single tablet, every single laptop, and didn't find any evidence of that flyer or that memo or all sorts of other search terms related to fraud, related to low education, low income. What's their claim, ladies and gentlemen? The memo was prepared by this campaign but not on any campaign computer or even on Mayor Heisman or the campaign manager's personal computers? And take their own exhibit, ladies and gentlemen. They gave you a copy of an email. Mr. Austin Harmon, this moment stuck out to me in the trial. He was up here cross-examining the mayor, screaming at him, saying, "You wrote this email. You wrote it under the auspices of attorney-client privilege." She believed when she wrote that email nobody'd ever see it. And what does it say in the email, ladies and gentlemen? Exactly what she said on the stand. Yes, she knew the man in the photo, but she didn't know what he was doing in the photo, and she hadn't seen him since she last represented him. That's their evidence. If they want you to believe any part of that email, hopefully they'd ask you to believe the entire thing. But even if you do believe, ladies and gentlemen, that they've met their burden in proving that that mayor conspired to distribute the misinformation, you still have to believe by the weight of the evidence that that misinformation caused an outcome change in this election. And how can we believe that when of the 150,000 residents, we didn't hear of a single one who was convinced or persuaded not to vote by this misinformation? Mr. Garcia took the stand, said there was some sort of hotline where people were reporting fraud. This election was decided by a few hundred votes. Mr. Garcia said on that hotline that was sent out to all the residents of Bellevue, only 122 reported any sort of fraud. And not a single one of those 122 said they didn't vote in the election as a result of it. They want to point to the numbers and say, oh, just because Ms. Ginger lost some supporters between February and the election, it must be fraud. It must be that people were convinced not to vote by misinformation. But ladies and gentlemen, we know that people can change their minds about voting for other reasons. We heard all sorts of first-time voters were registering to vote because they had enthusiasm for Ms. Ginger. What might cause them to lose their enthusiasm for Ms. Ginger? Maybe if she calls them leeches in public and that quote gets replayed over and over again on the news. Maybe if she shifts all of her resources from that district where they'd previously been centralized away to the other 11 districts while the mayor comes in. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, when Mr. Michael came to testify and showed you all those numbers, you saw that it wasn't just her vote count that dropped in that district, it was her support correspondingly, the percentage of people who said they liked her. Why would those pieces of fraud change the percent of people who said they liked Ms. Ginger? Doesn't make any sense. Those numbers, those are facts. They're not lies, neither side challenges them, they're facts. That gaffe hit the news, neither side challenges it. It's a fact. Ladies and gentlemen, she lost touch, and so she lost. Now, counsel stood before you a second ago and said that the most important thing people have is their voice. And I find it just a little ironic. Because what he's asking you, ladies and gentlemen, the 12 of you to do, is to take the voting voice away of a 150,000 person city that has already voted. The people, they've already spoken. And they spoke for the mayor. Let the people's voice stay heard. Don't take away a vote that wasn't influenced by misinformation fraud, that wasn't influenced by the mayor. She lost touch, and so she lost. And today, ladies and gentlemen, her suit is nothing but the lawsuit of a sore loser. Keep the mayor in the seat to which all those citizens elected her. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. You got about a minute?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court? Mr. Stern came up here and he ignored the connection that his client has to the man who misinformed and intimidated voters. He ignored the phone number. He ignored the meeting. He can ask you to believe that the storage of the number in the phone, that late night meeting, the denial in the press conference, that these things are all somehow coincidences. But members of the jury, when you hear from witness after witness, when you see evidence upon evidence, eventually these things stop being coincidences and they start to become proof. Proof that the mayor was connected to that voter misinformation. Intentional. And proof that you've got to find reliable. Thank you.